She walked into the office like any other day. But within minutes, whispers turned into laughter, and laughter turned into open humiliation. A black woman, mocked, belittled, and skirted in front of her colleagues, simply because they thought she didn't belong. What they didn't know was that their cruel performance was about to backfire in the most shocking way possible, because just as the room filled with smug grins and cruel stares, the door opened, and in walked the real boss. Her husband. The CEO. And in that instant, every smirk froze in place. The story begins not with the chaos of humiliation, but with the quiet, unsuspecting rhythm of an ordinary morning. For her, mornings were never ordinary, though. The woman at the center of this story, let's call her Amara, had grown used to being underestimated. She carried herself with poise, elegance, and strength. But in the corporate world, appearances were often judged before character. And that truth would become painfully clear in the hours to come. Amara had been married for 6 years, her life stitched together by love, resilience, and hard work. She wasn't just a wife to a powerful man. She was accomplished in her own right. A university graduate, a community mentor, and someone deeply committed to empowering women of color in professional spaces. Amara had carved her own path of dignity. But in the office building where she now stood, glass walls towering, polished floors, echoing the footsteps of hundreds of employees, no one knew who she really was. They didn't know her history, her intelligence, or her strength. They only saw her hoodie, her natural hair pulled back, and the simplicity of her attire. In their eyes, she wasn't a woman who belonged to this space, and that misjudgment would set everything in motion. Office environment. The office itself was the kind of environment that thrived on appearances. The lobby glistened with marble counters, the walls hung with sleek modern art. Receptionists clicked away at their keyboards with cold efficiency, security guards stood rigid with a false sense of authority, and employees bustled through revolving glass doors wearing tailored suits and designer shoes. This was a corporate world that valued image over substance, status over humanity. And Amara walked right into its heart, with no label, no introduction, no polished business card to protect. She was just herself, and in this office being herself was dangerous. Early glimpses of bias. When Amara first stepped up to the security checkpoint, the guard barely glanced at her before assuming she didn't belong. "Are you delivering something?" he asked flatly, not even making eye contact. She shook her head politely. "No, I'm just here to—" But he cut her off with a dismissive wave. "Deliveries go around the back. Employees use their access badges here." It wasn't the words themselves. It was the tone, that undercurrent of dismissal, the unspoken suggestion that someone like her couldn't possibly belong in such a space. Amara smiled gently, refusing to rise to it. "I'm not delivering. I'm here for my husband." That single statement should have been enough to calm suspicion, but instead it triggered curiosity, and worse, contempt. The receptionist leaned over from her desk, scanning Amara from head to toe. Hoodie, sneakers, no badge, no polished leather bag, no appearance of power. To the receptionist, she was an outsider, someone who didn't fit the mold of this glossy world. The whispers began right there, setting the stage for humiliation as Amara moved toward the elevators. A pair of junior associates caught sight of her. They nudged each other, smirking, and one whispered, "Wrong building?" The other stifled a laugh, muttering something about security needing to do their job. But Amara kept walking. Her quiet strength was unshaken, at least for now. What no one in that office knew was that she had entered this building countless times before. Not as an employee, not as a visitor to be logged and tracked, but as the wife of the man who sat at the very top. The CEO, the one whose signature decisions kept this corporation alive. But today, she hadn't come in on his arm. Today, she had walked in alone. and because she had stripped away the armor of wealth and status, leaving behind the polished outfits, the sleek jewelry, the outward signals of power, the office sharks smelled weakness, and they were ready to pounce. This office wasn't unique. Across corporate America, subtle forms of bias ran rampant. The side eyes in boardrooms, the doubting of qualifications, the silent but heavy weight of stereotypes pressed against people who dared to look different. But here, those subtle forms of bias were about to explode into something far uglier. The employees thrived on hierarchies. Interns looked down on assistants. Assistants mocked clerks. Clerks whispered about supervisors, and supervisors clawed for favor with managers. It was a culture where power wasn't respected, it was performed. And that performance was fueled by belittling others. So when Amara walked in, calm, quiet, dressed without any signal of status, she became the easiest target. First sparks of cruelty. The true sting began when she entered the common area near the office cafe. Employees were gathered around, sipping lattes and gossiping, and as Amara passed, the whispers sharpened into open commentary. "Lost, maybe," someone said under their breath. "Probably looking for the janitor's office," another chuckled. And then came the cruelest one, a young woman in a pencil skirt, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Skirt check, everyone. Looks like dress code doesn't apply to some people." The group burst into laughter. Amara froze for just a fraction of a second. Not because the words cut deeper than she could bear, but because of the sheer brazenness of it. In broad daylight, in a professional office, her dignity had been stripped. Away in front of dozens of watching eyes, simply because she didn't look like she belonged. Her inner world inside, Amara felt the sting. She wasn't immune to humiliation, no matter how strong her heart was. Years of resilience didn't erase the ache of being disrespected. She carried herself with grace, but even the strongest people have moments where the cruelty of others leaves a mark. Still, she reminded herself, "I know who I am. They don't." She thought of her husband upstairs, immersed in meetings and strategies, unaware that his wife was being torn down just a few floors below. She thought of all the women who had endured the same kind of treatment, judged by their skin, their hair, their clothing, rather than their worth, and she stood tall, foreshadowing the twist. But what the employees didn't realize was how dangerously close they were to the edge of their own downfall, because every smirk, every whisper, every mocking laugh was building toward a moment none of them could have predicted. The humiliation they thought would be forgotten in an hour would soon become the single most haunting memory of their careers. Because the man they answered to, the man whose decisions could shape or end their futures, was not just a distant CEO. He was the husband of the woman they were mocking. And he was about to walk through that door. The building's glass. Doors shut behind Amara with a thud that echoed like a warning. What should have been just another ordinary afternoon had already spiraled into something darker, sharper. She had entered the office lobby seeking only a simple meeting, a chance to deliver documents her husband had asked her to hand over. But the receptionist's sneer, the judgmental looks from passers-by, and the thinly veiled insults had lit the first sparks of humiliation. Now the fire was spreading. From the corner of the pristine lobby, whispers began. Employees in polished suits leaned toward each other, their voices dipping into conspiratorial tones. Amara could feel the burn of their stares on her skin, like a spotlight exposing her, stripping away her dignity. She adjusted her coat, trying to maintain composure. But the chill of condescension was undeniable. The receptionist didn't just stop at dismissive glances. She stood tall, folded her arms, and said loud enough for half the lobby to hear, "Ma'am, this isn't a mall. We don't allow loitering." The words cut deep. A hush fell across the room, quickly replaced by muffled laughter. Amara's chest tightened. Her instinct was to walk out, to leave them wallowing in their ignorance. But something inside her, the years of being overlooked, underestimated, silently dismissed, rooted her to the spot. Not today. Not this time. Still, the cruelty didn't pause. 2 interns strolled past, their voices dripping with mockery. Maybe she's lost? Security should have helped her out already. The other chuckled, eyeing her hoodie. Or maybe she thought this was a shelter. Poor thing. The comments weren't whispered this time. They were meant to sting. Amara's heart pounded, but she steadied herself. These walls, with their polished marble and golden plaques, were built on power and arrogance, and right now she was their chosen target. She could feel the weight of judgment pressing down, trying to force her to break, to flee. But Amara had endured worse. She had weathered storms of silence, carried burdens unseen, and battled anxiety in her quietest hours. Today, the humiliation was public, but it would not define her. Still, the ordeal escalated. The receptionist called over a junior manager, a man with sharp features and a voice designed to intimidate. He approached Amara with mock politeness, his smile insincere. "Ma'am, you really can't be here without an appointment, and dressed like this. It's against policy. If you have business, it should go through proper channels." The implication was clear. She didn't belong. She was an intruder, an inconvenience, an embarrassment against the pristine backdrop of wealth and professionalism. Amara opened her mouth to explain, but before she could, the manager raised a hand as if silencing a child. "I understand, but rules are rules. Please leave." The condescension was unbearable. Every word dripped with superiority, every gesture designed to diminish her. And yet, Amara held her ground. She clutched the envelope tighter, the one she had been entrusted to deliver, but the lobby's cruelty refused to end there. Another voice rang out from across the room. It was the operations coordinator, a woman whose stilettos clicked loudly against the polished floor. She sized Amara up with a look of disgust before sneering, "Oh, please. She's probably here to beg for a job. We've had enough of that lately." Her words landed with the force of a slap. Employees smirked. The air thickened with judgment, as if the entire office had silently agreed to turn her presence into a spectacle. One security guard even approached, resting his hand on his radio. "Do we need to escort her out?" he asked. Amara's hands trembled, though she masked it well. Every second was a battle against the heat of shame rising in her chest. But beneath it all, a quiet strength grew stronger. They thought they could erase her dignity with words, with stares, with false assumptions. They didn't know who she was. They didn't know the life she lived outside these walls. They didn't know that the very man at the top of this empire, the CEO whose name was etched in gold above the entrance, was her husband. But the irony of that fact wasn't what fueled her resolve. It was the principle. This wasn't just about her. It was about every woman who had been underestimated, every person who had been shoved aside because they didn't fit a shallow mold of success. Still, the office had one final cruelty left to deliver. As she stood firm, refusing to be escorted out, the junior manager leaned closer. His voice lowered, but the venom was unmistakable. "Look, I don't know what you think you're doing here, but you're embarrassing yourself. People like you don't get opportunities here. You should know better." The words carved into her soul, not because they reflected truth, but because they revealed the ugly heart of prejudice, arrogance, and ignorance. Her silence was her shield. But the storm raged on. Each second stretched painfully. Each judgmental laugh echoed louder. Each sneer, each dismissive glance piled atop the last, until the humiliation seemed unbearable. And yet, Amara did not move. She didn't shout, didn't argue, didn't plead. She simply stood, her eyes steady, her hands gripping the envelope, like a weapon of patience. The crowd of onlookers, employees who had gathered under the pretense of curiosity, grew restless. Some whispered that security should drag her out. Others giggled, enjoying the spectacle. A few shifted uncomfortably, sensing the cruelty had gone too far, but unwilling to speak against the tide. Minutes passed like hours. The tension was suffocating, and then, the moment before the breaking point. The receptionist, emboldened by the collective mockery, raised her voice one last time. "Ma'am, this is the last warning. If you don't leave immediately, I'll have security remove you. You have no business here." The arrogance was absolute, the humiliation complete. And just as the words hung in the air, the glass doors behind Amara swung open. Every head turned. Polished shoes struck the marble floor with authority. Conversations died instantly. The weight of silence filled the room. The CEO had arrived. He stepped forward, his presence commanding, his gaze cutting through the crowd. Employees straightened, nervous energy crackling in the air. Respect replaced arrogance in a heartbeat. Amara's heart pounded. She had endured the storm, absorbed every cruel word, every dismissive glance. Now, the turning point had come. The receptionist's smirk faltered. The manager's confidence drained. Even the security guard shifted uneasily. They didn't know. They had no idea. The woman they had humiliated, dismissed, and nearly dragged out was not just anyone. She was the CEO's wife. And in the next moment, the entire office would learn the price of their arrogance.